Hi, everybody. My name is Quinn Pettifer. I'm the Manager of Brand Initiatives for the Gazette and on the Iowa Ideas Events Planning team. I want to say thank you, everyone, for joining us. We've had a fantastic morning, and it's just been awesome to keep the conversations going. And I'm really excited about this specific session and topic, which is collaborative nonprofits. We at the Gazette have a great program, the Gazette Gives Back, which there's a few of us that oversee, and it is all about connecting nonprofits. So this is a topic that is especially near and dear to my heart, and very excited to hear from our panelists today. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this. The description is pretty self-explanatory, but we're going to look today at how nonprofits can work together for the greater good. Their mission of their services and how it does benefit the clients that they serve. And at surface level, of course, why wouldn't you want to collaborate? But there's some intentionality there. So we're going to talk a little bit about just how to sort through that and what we can all be doing and considering and taking moving forward. But I'm going to turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves. We've got a great variety here and want to talk to Angie, Jamie, and Opara to help explain their own organizations and then just some of the ways that they are working in the collaborative space. So Opara, with Tanager Place, I'm going to call on you first.
All right. Thank you so much, Quinn. It's such a pleasure to be with everyone today in this virtual format. I am Opara Rice. I'm the CEO of Tanager Place and have been here for about 7 years. We are a children's behavioral health firm and do a lot of different things with young people in the community. In addition, I sit on a lot of area boards. I'm a board member for the Greater Cedar Rapids Foundation, also Cedar Rapids Bank and Trust, and Marion Civil Rights Commission and the Marion Public Library. So I get a chance to spend a lot of time with a lot of different folks who are trying to find ways to connect the dots and connect organizations together to really maximize resources. So for me, collaboration is very much a part of the work that I do and as a piece of, I think, what makes this community pretty special. So glad to be with you all today.
Thanks, Opara. How about Jamie?
Thanks, Quinn. My name's Jamie Henley, and can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Great. Jamie Henley, I'm the Chief Operating Officer with Community Health Free Clinic. We are, what our name says, we are a free clinic here in Cedar Rapids. We provide free medical, dental, vision, and prescription services to folks in our community who really have nowhere else to turn. I also sit as the chair of My Care Community, which is a collaborative effort of about 20 plus organizations throughout Linn County to provide collaborative care to people in our community who are in need. My wife and I also own Giving Tree Theater in Uptown Marion, and one of our missions is to give back to nonprofits. So each month we pick a new nonprofit. So done a lot of learning and collaborating with nonprofits on how to get their message out. So really happy to be here and to share with this fine group.
Thanks, Jamie. Last but not least, we have Angie.
Good afternoon. I'm Angie Delivert, and I'm the Chief Community Impact Officer with the Community Foundation of Greater Des Moines. So Opara referenced the Greater Cedar Rapids Community Foundation, so they are our colleagues in the Cedar Rapids area, but I'm happy to be here. Much like many community foundations, we really exist to help support donors and connecting to causes that they're individually passionate about, serve a lot in the community leadership space, helping to convene different organizations and partners around community issues, and really just overall talking about the importance of charitable giving in a community. I have been at the Community Foundation here for 8 years, and the concept of collaboration has always been kind of core to my professional work, having served at the Iowa Council of Foundations prior to that, working statewide, connecting funders to one another and to organizations and causes throughout the state. certainly, I think one of the ways maybe to describe my role at the Community Foundation is as a community pollinator. I help spend my time thinking about how to connect the resources of the foundation externally, and also help connect people in the community with one another. So that includes overseeing our grant making programs, the various leadership tables that we sit at in community conversations, not just that we convene, but also that we help to provide information to and help to inspire and inform. Much like the other two panelists, have the privilege of being engaged in several different nonprofit organizations, a lot of them in the spirit of systems and collaboration. So thanks again.
Angie, I'm totally stealing pollinator, community pollinator.
I have a lot of bees
it.
around my office, just visually, because it's the best way to describe. I really do think what we do. So yes, you're welcome to steal it, Quinn.
Great. You've all heard it here. She gave us permission. All right. So before we get into the collaborative portion, I wanted to ask our panelists about the state of nonprofits overall. Pre-pandemic, we were going into 2020 with some very real concerns on resources and just the state of nonprofits, especially those in the human and social service realm. And throw a pandemic, and then for many of us in Eastern Iowa, especially a derecho on top of it, resources are scarce. And where are we? Where are we as a nonprofit community?
I would jump in on that. I would say shell-shocked in a way, right? I think it's really hard for a lot of leaders to admit how hard this year has been. It's never an easy road for any nonprofit, right? It is. Many times we are doing a lot of fundraising, to make sure we're able to meet mission. But the pandemic threw a wrinkle in that I don't think anybody could have anticipated. And it is not hyperbole to say that it's literally been life-changing, right? And we have really had to shift how we not only just provide services for for those who serve, but also how do we continue to raise resources to meet mission in ways that we've not been able, have had to do before. So this has been, I think, a really challenging year, but it also has spawned a lot of creativity and a lot of innovation and people thinking outside the box. But it's been collectively, I would say, a difficult year.
Yeah, I think we also too have to look at the fact that through all this, we've got more people who are in need of our services as well. So you take the challenges that the nonprofits have, and then you put on top of that, I think a greater need within our communities, and now suddenly it kind of multiplies what the nonprofits are going through trying to find those resources. So it's been tough, but I agree. I think it's certainly opened up a lot of people's eyes to look outside the box and try to find some new and creative ways to provide those services.
The thing that comes to mind when I think about it, and both of you, really senior leaders at such important, service providing organizations, I just continue to be in awe of the sector and the folks who are really managing during this time. And I think one of the things for me as a community member, is, COVID has really brought to light how critically important it is that nonprofits aren't seen as gap fillers, and what as a community and what as a state we can do to help our region, our decision makers, donors, other partners in the space understand that the bigger that there are gaps that exist when program needs expand and funding needs draw down, nonprofits can't always just fill that whole gap. Like, people really need to come around them, and those gaps are getting bigger and wider. And the nonprofit sector and philanthropy, whether it's formal or informal, it's not always going to be able to meet those divisions. And the other thing that's kind of circling in my mind is we talk a lot about how, especially in moments of challenge, it's easy to say, well, you need to innovate. People need to innovate. People need to innovate. The nonprofit sector was founded on innovation, and every day the nonprofit sector is innovating. And I think, again, it's so important to help have those critical conversations around how we support that work because it's always been there. I mean, I don't know Jamie and Okpara very well, but I guarantee you these two individuals are innovating daily. And so as much as we can do to just remind folks that this, nonprofit is a tax code, it's not a business model. We've got significant work to do. And we really need people to understand the role of the sector in general. And times like this, I think, really elevate that for us as a community and as a state.
Thank you. To your point, Angie, about it's beyond being a gap filler. It's done with intentionality. Has it always been that way? That's one of the questions that we had from audience members was, has it always looked like this? So I guess I'll take a step back of 10 years ago. What did partnerships look like versus current state? Can you give us a little bit on the history? Is it done with more intentionality now? And if so, how?
Boy, go ahead, Angie, I cut you off. Yeah, I think when you go back, it's so interesting how fast things evolve, right? And a lot of, depending on the industry, remember the nonprofit sector is a very large sector, right? So it includes a lot of different pieces to it. That when you look at partnerships, have always been a piece and a foundation of what I believe the nonprofit sector does. It's just sort of a natural thing. You cannot there's no nonprofit in any state I've lived in that can cover all the needs of that community. And so you have to have the mentality of building bridges together. And we'll talk a little bit about that's always easier said than done, but it is a part of what we have to do. And I think what has evolved now is that funders are asking, and Angie can definitely speak to this, are really asking for more strategic partnerships together. I think people are really like, hey, we don't want to duplicate services. Can you really partner together with this person and this person? And I think that the funding landscape has changed a little bit over the last decade.
Yeah, I agree with Okpara that the funding landscape, I think, has been driving a lot of that. And I think in many cases, the understanding of what collaboration means and looks like to different partners is different. And I think getting a common language, or at least for the nonprofits to understand what the funders mean when they use that word, is really important. And so, I've had in the past, 5 years, a lot more one-on-one discussions with nonprofits around what we mean when we say collaboration. But we've been asking about it since before I came here 8 years ago. So it's been core to what we do, but I think, again, we're approaching it understanding that it's a massive continuum of opportunity. And it takes funding to do that. It takes trust and authenticity. And the other thing, I think, to your question that I would just add is my sense in the conversations around collaboration anecdotally have moved from very mission-focused organizational efficiency to the higher level systems change conversations. The strategic, the advocacy, the root causes, and I'm grateful for that, but that's a lot of big work too. So that might be just one additional anecdotal reference that I've seen in conversations, that type of a shift. Certainly we still see the individual need, but gosh, we're having a lot of conversations over here, which I think is really exciting, but much bigger work too sometimes.
Well, I think that's really where some of the changes happened in the last 10 years is, especially from those kind of large pieces, was those are really driven by oftentimes government grants where it said, here, we want to focus on this one issue. And so nonprofits got together, they collaborated and they did some stuff. And maybe the grant lasted a year or 2 years. And so they collaborated really well. And then the grant went away and the collaboration kind of just goes away too. And I think now what we're seeing is nonprofits saying, hey, you know what? How can we collaborate together and take advantage of any grants that are available, but also continue that work outside of maybe a specific funding source? So how do we either fund it ourselves, or how do we find other sources through foundations or partnerships that allow that work to continue? instead of it being financially driven collaboration, and really working for those big picture pieces in that way.
I've seen some of that same conversation, Jamie, in discussions with individual donors as well. I'd be curious if in both of your spaces, if you've had that more. We work with a lot of donor advised funds at the Community Foundation, and I've been really inspired by a lot of the one-on-one discussions where donors are starting to ask more about, well, how does this organization fit into this ecosystem? How is this organization helping leverage this work? And I've seen it happen in conversations around food, and I've seen it happen in conversations around refugees and health and mental health care support. But curious if that's translating down at the organizational level, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, I would just chime in there. I was waiting on Jimmy. One of the things I think that we have seen too is the sophistication of donors who are understanding the complex issues of a community maybe differently than even they did 5 or 6 years ago. And I think that, you didn't say anything anybody doesn't know, they're really trying to make sure you're leveraging that dollar as much as possible, and they want to have as much impact as possible. And so I think they are asking much higher level macro questions about how this really all fits. But I actually think I like that. I think that means you have a real engaged donorship, right? And philanthropy has, again, like anything, has evolved. And people don't just want to send in a check. They really want to know that they are helping that community thrive. And so that's been something we've seen in our donor community as well.
Yeah, and I think too, you're seeing nonprofits communicate so much more with their donors and on so many different levels that I think those donors are starting to see, what's happening in the community from a variety of different nonprofits, and so they can start to put together. They can kind of see where the puzzle pieces fit, and maybe say, hey, I don't see where you fit in here. Can you help me see, where you as an organization fit in with maybe these other 5 organizations that I support, and really want to make sure that their money is going to the best that they can.
I think that the other thing, just to be real, right? We're talking about friendly competition in a way, right? Nobody likes to talk about it like that, but really what it is, we're all competing for the same pool of donor dollars. And so, and those donors give to multiple, we have such a philanthropic community here. They give to multiple organizations. And it's really, to me, it's just a prudent investment to say, okay, hey, how are you really tying this all together? I've had a conversation with one donor once, said, hey, I got hit up by 4 different nonprofits, and they're all saying, like, kind of doing the same sort of thing. Can y'all just get together and work on this together, right? And so some of that can also, kind of donor fatigue too, right? And that's another piece that can happen in a community. And so, I think that there are a lot of different reasons why nonprofits are really working collaboration very differently in partnerships than we did before.
So one question, and we'll get a little bit deeper into the challenges portion, because that is, to Okpara's point, it's not all rainbows and unicorns, right? This is there's some very real concerns to get into when you're thinking about these intentional collaborations. But in terms of benefits, one question that was raised was just the client experience. And do you start there? Do you start with the financial incentive and work towards that? Obviously everybody's got the greater good in mind, but when you're thinking about the balance and how to prioritize the potential benefits with the realities of an intense and deep partnership, how do you sort through, how do you prioritize?
I think it's funny. I think, Angie said it early on that, a 501c3 or a nonprofit, right? It's an IRS distinction. But at the end of the day, we all have payrolls we have to meet. We all have boards that we have to report to that are looking at, from a financial standpoint, is it a good business model, right? And are we able to meet our expenses and everything else? So I think at the very beginning, that's where it has to start, right? And does it make financial sense to the organization to be able to do something? But then, I think we look at how do we do that then within that frame to best meet the needs of the community.
Yeah, I think, and Jamie, you may want to talk a little bit about the My Care community piece, because I think that one is so unique and what it brought to this community, because it really wasn't a fiscal stake in that. It really was driven by providing better services, more coordinated services around the community. And when it was first introduced, I think people were like, well, will it really work? Will people really participate? And what it came out to is you have a lot of, that's probably the largest collaboration partnership that is ongoing in Cedar Rapids, I would say, is that you have a lot of people at the table. What is it, over 20 organizations now, Jamie? Something
Yep.
like that. That is a lot of people to get kind of moving in one direction, and it has been sustained. And so I don't know if you want to speak to that, because I think that one really did come together really very much about mission and everybody looking at their mission and saying, how can this system help serve a community? And I think it's been successful.
Yeah, so My Care Community came out of a grant first through Iowa Department of Public Health, and that's what kind of started driving it. And Linn County Public Health did a fantastic job of putting together the initial groups of organizations. And like I said earlier, the first thing that the organizations really started looking at was, all right, how do we sustain this beyond the government grant? And yeah, the organizations came together and put in a financial stake into the group. And yeah, we're 20 plus groups really working on how do we best put the client needs first? How do we make sure that the client doesn't have to tell the same story 16 different times each time they walk into an organization? How do we make a referral from one organization to another as easy as possible from the client's standpoint? And that meant a little more work from the organization standpoint, but made it a little easier for the client. And yeah, we're starting our fourth year. Actually, almost our fifth year. We're a year and a half after the money ran out from the government, and we're still strong in really doing, really looking at what's best for the client.
Jamie, that description and your last comment about what's best for the client reminds me, I had read an article, and of course I can't remember where it is right now, but was talking about the role of collaboration when nonprofits work together. When nonprofits work together, it's a means to an end, not the final destination. And so really having clarity on why you are collaborating, why you're considering a strategic merger, why you're thinking about a coalition, is so foundational in order to even begin conversation. But I love that, because people will come sometimes, or organizations come to us quite a bit, and say, gosh, we're trying to figure out how we can become financially more viable. Well, okay, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to merge with an entity. Like, let's really think and step back about what is the ultimate destination that you want to get to, and then how does the collaboration piece fit into that?
Yeah, I would just add in that it all starts with mission. That their clarity of mission. Tanager Place has been involved with Youthport for almost 5-6 years, which is a collaboration we do with the Boys and Girls Club of the Corridor and YPN. And really, you have 3 very different organizations who have complementary services. And we meet every week. I've had a meeting with the CEOs of those 2 organizations literally every week since I've been in town, which is sometimes they can be really fun meetings. I just want to say, as we get, but it really comes back to mission and how all our mission sort of fits nicely like a puzzle piece together. And I think if you don't have that in that conversation first, no collaboration will really work, because it's going to be driven by something that's not consumer driven, right? It's going to be driven. If it's driven by fiscal concerns, those things won't last, because that doesn't mean your missions are going to align together. And so again, I go back to My Care Community. Even after all the government money ran out, it didn't dissolve. People said, okay, well, let's see how we can divvy this up and make this still exist, because people understood how it fit for their mission. And that's not an understatement, because that could easily just like, oh, well, we tried it, money ran out, whatever, I got other things to worry about. But it has continued and continue to grow. And I think it's gonna be here for quite some time. I think people are very committed to it.
So beyond the money right out, or the it's just the end of a specific project. Let's talk a little bit about the challenges and wavering mission statements, data systems. One team member perhaps making things a little bit challenging. So what are some of the real challenges that you see often when thinking about collaborations and intentional collaborations? And my follow-up question is, when do you make the decision to cut ties? Do you assess, or do you just keep going? At what point do you realize this isn't going to happen?
Well, a couple of things that jump to mind for me right away. One is a major challenge can be in assumptions that are brought into the conversation to begin with. And when you think about, there's great research out there on how and what collaboration can look like. Everything from very merger, for example, and really thinking about what that can look like, whether it be a subsidiary type structure or whatever it may be, all the way up to more like coordinated action, more informal types of collaborations, all have a role. But I think one of the big challenges can be when organizations that want to come together don't have clarity of assumption, or they're assuming the goals of everyone else. And I've seen where that has been detrimental to progress around an issue. I think the other thing that comes to mind too is, not having those trusting and authentic relationships, or the willingness to create those. When Okpara was talking about meeting with the executive directors weekly, I'm sure they're fun, but I'm also sure there are some pretty, difficult conversations. And I would assume that, you've all been able to talk about those must-haves, or whatever you want to call them, sacred cows, whatever it may be, to say like, this is something that we're not willing to give up. This has to be a piece of it. And, if organizations coming together, don't have the ability yet, for whatever reason, to be clear on those things, on their must-haves, I think you can have danger down the road. And then another piece too is just organizations that come together. I think I've heard people say, well, sometimes it's hardest with the nonprofit or with the executive directors. But don't forget about the board's understanding in what the collaboration looks like, right? I mean, it's amazing to me. I've been in some conversations where it's the board members who are adamantly opposed to a merger, and the executive directors see the need clear as day for a variety of reasons. But that's not going to work well unless everybody's on board in terms of the why. So those are just a couple of things that pop into my mind when you ask about challenges.
Jamie or Opara, any additional insight on this?
Yeah, I'm sitting here thinking about it. Angie, you did a great job. I'm trying to think of how I could be as eloquent as you. Sometimes you just work each other's nerves, right? This is the other piece to it. Not every organization works well together. This is the reality. People are people. Relationships, Angie said it. It comes down to relationships. It comes down to mission. It comes down to understanding. It also comes with, I have to put part of my ego off to the side. I have to put part of what is the most important strategic thing for my organization off to the side, so that we can find some middle ground to work together. A collaboration is not where it's, one organization really comes out on top and another one, just sort of lagging behind. It doesn't work that way. But people are people. And sometimes it's hard to say that to each other. And sometimes you have really good, healthy debates behind the scenes. One collaboration that I'm sure Rachel Rockwell, if people got a chance to hear about the SET task force, was made up of people from all over the community, and then, has moved into the policy group at the foundation. But those are very intense meetings, and were very intense community meetings, and very, very hard. And there was a lot of work for people to be able to come out of their perspective, look at the lens of another person, to be able to advance that. Otherwise, it would never have worked. And that took a long time to get there. And even as a person as part of the policy group, there's still a lot of disagreement around, different direction, but somehow you find a way. But it really takes you as a person and as a professional being able to really step back and see the greater good. And sometimes that means not doing something or sniping back at somebody if you feel like slighted or something like that. That's part of why collaborations don't always succeed. It's just not everybody is being equal at the table and unable to really voice that their displeasure with a decision. And so again, communication and relationships are critical, and trust. And there are people that organizationally you just never will align with, and you just never actually approaching each other around collaboration, and that's okay too. But that's a part of human nature.
Yeah, I think too. I think leadership is a key role in that, and and what kind of leader is kind of bringing those groups together, and then allowing them to share maybe some of those frustrations in a safe environment, to be able to do that. And then Quinn, you mentioned data systems and how do you collaborate when maybe you've got 6 organizations who are using 6 different databases and 6 different types of systems, which makes it difficult to share information, which has been one of the successes of my care community, in the fact that was the first thing that the group committed to, was having a shared system that allows us to make those referrals back and forth. And then we've had some other partnerships and other collaborations use the same system, which is going to allow them to do that. The Access Center is a good point of that, 4 organizations coming together and really working together, and they're going to use a common system to be able to share information. Otherwise, it gets really difficult to start looking at how are we all helping the same patient, and how is that helping the client if suddenly they've got to go into 4 different systems, they've got to tell everything over and over again. Just makes it more complicated. So when you can start to share some of those things easily, it's a lot easier.
And I do think that the fiscal piece, Quinn, I think is another part of that, as well, that we can't ignore. Again, what's going to be the financial stake for an organization in a collaboration? If you're splitting a grant, is it a 50-50 split? Is it going to be 70-30? That those type of things also have to be talked about so clearly. When I look at Youthport, for us, like, we do multiple things, but we have grants for Youthport that the Tanager place doesn't get a portion of those grants because we're not doing that part of the work. And so, you just have to be very honest about how grants are kind of carved up to make sure it is, first of all, meeting the need of that grant and the spirit of that grant, but also the spirit of the collaboration. And so that's another piece of it. And those fiscal talks are equally as important.
So another question that came up that was submitted before the conference, and anybody on, feel free to, in the chat section, if you have follow-up questions as well, we'd love to hear from you. Our room host, Seth, is keeping an eye out. But one that was submitted prior to our session today was, okay, if you get the buy-in at executive level, board level, and then it goes into implementation time, how do you engage your team? How do you engage the people that are doing the work, that are really kind of making this happen? Do you take them along the way? Is it, what's the strategy?
Yeah, I could just chime in there a little bit too, is if we think that the executive directors and boards are going to make it all happen, that is really naive. It never works that way. Just so you know, the people who are closest to the work are the ones who actually execute on vision and do the heavy lifting. You have got to have them along the way. They have got to be a part of that partnership, part of that collaboration forming. They've got to have a voice. Those are really critical things. And it also helps with when there are issues or speed bumps or obstacles that come up, that they can work with the partners of the team members of the other partners to be able to solve problems where everything doesn't rise back up to the executive level. Again, for Youthport, we have a once a month leadership meeting, which has leaders from all 3 organizations come together and talk about things. Again, when you look at the SET task force, there are multiple meetings that come together to talk about things, policy direction. And so you know, you got to have those people at the table to make things move. And so for me, I think you really do have to involve the team and engage them as much as you can.
Yeah, I would agree. That's nothing's going to get done if they're not doing it, right? I mean, they're the ones who are, you know, who are meeting with the patients or clients day in and day out. They're the ones that have to do that work. And so for the same thing, for my care community, they've got a quarterly meeting where the core care coordinators get together and talk about, you know, hey, here's what I'm seeing, here's what we're doing, here's what we're seeing, you know, a bottleneck or a problem, and then here's how we think we can fix it. And that's where a lot of the solutions are going to come from as well. You know, because again, they're the ones that are working with each other, you know, really trying to help the client. So you've got to have buy-in from them. In my case, I usually try to talk to them throughout the whole process, right? Here's what we're thinking about doing. Here's what we're looking at doing. You know, what would you need? How would you need it to look? And then, you know, let's make it happen.
Well, you know, I'd be curious what your thoughts are on this, but I would also imagine, you know, the conversation with staff on the ground, doing that day-to-day work, helping them understand really the why the collaboration is in existence, but also what the limits are that they have, you know, especially, you know, folks who are, you know, incredibly passionate or maybe direct service providers or something. You know, there are so many times that we see folks in the sector spread themselves beyond thin. And so I think sometimes the spirit of collaboration, you know, is so exciting, and there's such good work to be done, and there's more work that can be done. But I also think that there's an opportunity for leadership to help staff across the board understand not just the why, but where they have permission and limits, to make sure that we're still honoring the true collaborative arrangement and not maybe overtaking what we've committed to do just for the health of the overall effort too. So I don't know if you've all had experience with that, but I do think I can see where that's happened in the past too. People are usually all in.
Right, very true. The other thing that happens, which is actually cool, is some of the staff who are out in the community doing the hard work and the heavy lifting will come back and shoot an email saying, hey, have you connected with this organization, or have you met this exec? This might be a partnership, or we might want to be closer to them, which is the other thing. And so it also happens the other way, where, you know, team members bring people to me and say, hey, I think we should know them better, or this is a new program that's out there. You should connect with them. And that's another thing that happens, which has been another way that, you know, again, I think even staff are understanding we've got to connect. We're much stronger together, and they're naturally doing that. I think it's a different mindset than it was 5 years ago.
Great. So another question was on the assessment process. So the question was just overall, what do you recommend to assess partnerships and collaborations, and how often and how are clients a part of that assessment? And the example used is, is surveys, groups, is it one-on-one conversations with the client served, if it is a client service, and how does that work?
I don't know if the question is more around like mergers and acquisitions, and Angie may be able to speak to more of that. But I think from the service side, usually, you know, we're not necessarily doing community surveys, although they've been done. You know, so those collaborations, again, it really starts with mission. And I think there's just sort of an informal assessment of, all right, does this make sense? How can we have people access our services? How can they access your services? So it's a much more informal sort of process. I think, though, when you get into more formal business merger, business acquisition, there's some due diligence that has to happen that's very different and legal. And that's a different kind of animal, I believe. I'm not sure about that. I haven't been a part of that yet.
Well, you know, one of the things that we've done, I said that we've been engaged in asking about collaborations, and as a grant maker, we have had for many years a capacity building grant program where we have provided funding for exactly what Opara was referencing, which is facilitated support of organizations to go through some of those legal steps necessary for whether it be full mergers or other sort of program legal program alignment as well. So we've had, funded organizations to hire a consultant to facilitate the process of creating a management service organization that then helps to provide staffing support and other functions to two, connected yet distinctively different missions in the community. But one of the things that we've done at a heightened level, especially as a result of COVID in our community, is we've pivoted our grant making to create what we call a strategic collaboration grant program. And what we have done on several occasions is provide the funding for those completely exploratory discussions. So well in advance of any legal conversation, any deep dives on documents and all of those types of things, but really the experience of imagining together, creating trusting spaces, and deciding, is something more formal worth diving into? So, I think for us, we have, like I said, funded several of those organizations, some of which we aren't even saying out loud right now, because there's such a need for the sector to be able to explore without the concern of donor retaliation or dropping giving or, whatever it might be, right? And I think, we did that because we know that that's a space that's needed and it's a space that we can lean into. But we also did that knowing full well that the results of those investments may very well be, we decided that there's nothing more formal that can be done. But we're doing it because even if that's the answer, it's such a better investment to understand rather than forcing something or providing and jumping right away to the legal, because of all the things we've talked about already. The relationships, the understanding of the ecosystems, the really diving down on why, the complexities of finance and board and founders and history and on and on and on. So I don't know if that's an exact answer to the question, but, I just, every single one of these scenarios, whether it's a coalition, of which we've funded the creation of a coalition, whether it's joint research that people are coming together and then using it to create idea labs, or if it's full-blown creation of a merged entity, there's a place for funders to come to that, but with the reality that it's going to be messy and it may not get the outcomes that we think, but the goal is to get the outcomes that the community needs. So we're going to learn a lot after this, I'm telling you.
Get messy for the greater good. Jamie, anything to add to that?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that's it's a tough spot to be in, and I think as funders can help us really kind of look at that in a different way.
Okay, another good one here, another good question. How does change of board members, staff, leadership impact collaborations? So I imagine change when it comes to the nonprofits. Probably a different answer for each one of those, but I'll let the experts tackle that.
Yeah, I think that one of the constants we know is there's going to be change. Change in leadership is probably even more significant than board changes, right? Because board changes will be staggered, but the core of the board usually stays together. I think, though, again, I'm going to go back and I'm going to reference the YPN youth port relationship. People from this area know we lost an amazing exec, Brian Stutzman, a few years ago, and he was a huge piece of actually the formulation of youth port. And a new executive, Alejandro Pino, joined the table and stepped in, and it just did not miss a beat. Again, he came in with the spirit of understanding how it fit mission for YPN, why YPN was invested in youthport, why they're part of the table. And so I think that you can have leadership changes if those missions are so strong, and the reason why you're together is so it makes so much sense that you can have people. Of course, people bring a different flavor and different philosophy and different viewpoint about the work, but there's a beauty in that too. That if really, again, I'm very mission driven, and if the reason you're together, the reason you're collaborating is really based on something that is helping the community and helping your clients, whoever that is, I think those collaborations can continue to thrive even if you have some leadership changes. It may take a different look, but they can continue to thrive.
And then I just think having the courage, again, depending on the type of collaboration that you're talking about, that having the courage to know too when and how you can part ways if you need to. You know, I'm a strong believer in collaboration. I'm a strong believer in alignment, but I'm also a strong believer in sometimes things don't work. And so now that looks a little different if you've merged an organization, right, than if you're coming around a table talking about a bigger community issue. But, you know, I think it's important too to be able to know when it's okay to part. And sometimes that's hard to admit, but again, if you're doing it for the right reasons, sometimes it makes sense.
Yeah, and I think, you know, if we've done the things that we've talked about, you know, throughout today, you know, if we've, you know, come together and it's a mission-driven collaboration, we've brought on board our staff and made sure that they know what's going on and that they're involved in doing it, that you can weather those changes a lot easier. Yeah, I mean, you know, a new leader, especially, you know, that's probably the hardest one, or the one that could have the most issues. But I think if you've laid the groundwork and hopefully the board has chosen a leader that's going to continue the groundwork that's been laid, that yeah, you can continue those collaborations. But yeah, as Angie said, you know, but sometimes it's just, you know, mistakes are made and you walk away.
Another question that came up was just not so much about collaboration, but just about sharing information and providing updates when you are a nonprofit with other nonprofits. To the point of, there's always going to be staff changes. There's always going to be you know, things of that nature. Do you guys have any advice in terms of programs or communication methods to just keep nonprofits talking to each other and engaged together?
Go ahead, Okpara.
No, I was going to say, this is one I actually enjoy a lot. And I always tell people, I don't think people realize just how much we all talk to each other. There is an informal network and it's not just about the work, it's also about the support that we give each other. Because this can be very tough work, and we should do a lot of information sharing. Hey, you have a policy on this? If I'm struggling with this employee, and a lot of things, just informally have these conversations. I want to say I may have 5 or 6 of these a week, and when things happen in organizations that are tough, or we pick up the phone, we shoot each other texts. Hey, hang in there, we're with you. You can get through this. You know, this is really, I think, one of the beauties about the nonprofit world. To me, is that there is a love of each other, of what each other brings to the table and mission. And so there's a lot of open sharing in very informal ways that happen. And so, you know, formally there's, you know, we have peer groups that the foundation puts on as well, which are great. Carrie Walker hosts those. Those are wonderful formal things that you can come to as well, which is great sharing. But there's a whole informal network that also happens behind the scenes that is very much information sharing, best practice sharing, and just sheer support, which has been wonderful.
Yeah, and I'd say if that's not happening, you know, to maybe the viewer's question is, then you need to reach out to you know, to maybe your peers. You know, if you're not in Cedar Rapids, if you're somewhere else, reach out to the peers in the nonprofit world, because you're right. I think the one thing about nonprofit leaders is, right, we are mission driven. We're really in this to help people. And that not only means the people who are walking through our door, but that also means, you know, other nonprofits, and how do we help leaders be better leaders, and that we know are going to help, you know, help the community. So reach out to those.
Well, and I'd echo that. You know, I think we're a state that has been incredibly fortunate to have such a strong growth of community foundations among other funders that are incredibly passionate about their local places and connections. And Okpara referenced the good work happening in Cedar Rapids. And, we do similar things here in terms of, every other week calls right now virtually, that it's just like this and connecting folks. But there's also just value in making sure that even, the funders are able to understand what you're challenged by, what you need, because you never know when we're able to help make some of those connections. It was incredible through our collaborative disaster recovery fund. We knew there was significant challenge in the Latinx community here. And we knew that the best way to do that was to reach out to 3 key on the ground nonprofit organizations and say, how much money do you need? What do you think would work best? Who can leverage what in the most effective way? I mean, those are places too where funders can help to enhance those relationships. And that investment has drawn down hundreds of thousands of new dollars to our community and to our state. And that's simply because of what we were talking about, helping to create a space for individual connections and people to imagine and work together in whatever way makes sense for them. Rather than giving them a prescription for what's going to work. So yeah, I'd encourage you to reach out as much as you can. We know it takes time, so we'll try and do the same, on the funder side of it all, because we know all of the things that you guys are trying to do, but it's so helpful.
So where do you see collaborations going in 2021? We'll just fast forward the rest of 2020, I don't think anybody would be opposed to that. Where do you see nonprofit collaborations moving forward?
I think you're going to see more and more of them, not only from a formal standpoint, but also just from how can we help each other type of collaborations. As we see dollars start to kind of shrink, as the pandemic continues and we're seeing resources become more and more scarce, I think you're going to see collaborations continue to grow, just like you're seeing in the for-profit business world. I think you're going to continue to see those in the nonprofit world as well.
And you're going to see more collaborations within the sector around the larger system issues and system conversations that need to take place and have been happening. But I think there's going to be more concentrated conversation about that. Take COVID, for example, a lot of resources coming to communities, but there's an opportunity to leverage and lift up the voice around how critical it is to get additional resources to the sector as well. And that's an advocacy role and an advocacy function, and helping people understand. I can't remember who said it before. The nonprofit sector is an economic driver in our state. It's a significant portion of our workforce. And so there'll be other opportunities around not just the structure and the role and the real need for the sector, but also other advocacy type things to just really help leverage, additional action and support for the missions across the state too. So I think we're going to see more of that.
I do think also you may see more contraction in the nonprofit sector and probably more merger together to maximize resources. I think that depending on what does happen with the pandemic and fundraising, I think you may see a little bit more of that. And I think people are already kind of thinking, can we be stronger together? Again, from just, what has been happening in the community. So I anticipate you may see a few more of those type of conversations and probably some mergers together.
Quinn, can I just say one other thing too? Because sometimes I realize maybe we're talking about the hard things of collaboration. And I just want to say, especially in this time of COVID, we have seen such a support for our nonprofit community, in particular in Des Moines is where I can speak from. But, we have seen our donor advised fund holders increase their giving significantly. At our midpoint, we had 40% more grants out through our donor advised funds, because people understand how critical the nonprofits are, and they see how much work they are being asked to do. And I think as much as we can continue to talk about our individual missions, but how they fit into our communities, to making really thriving and happy and successful communities for everybody, I'm very optimistic about those collaborations are going to help drive us to better communities. And so I think, we've got our role to do to help continue to share that story with donor community as well. But just wanted to reiterate my thanks for that, because it's difficult work, but it's also so exciting when you think about what's possible.
Absolutely. Well, we've got a couple minutes left, and I'm going to wrap with the question that I always end these Iowa Ideas sessions with. What can we do as Iowans to support this work moving forward? And everybody can chime in. And also just thanks to our panelists. This has been a fantastic conversation, but what can we do?
I think that one of the things you can do is to help connect the dots, help connect organizations together, be a convener, be engaged. And my dog doesn't like that because it's growling at that thought. So I don't know what that's all about. But I think that's one thing that we can do, again, is to help connect the dots for each other and bring people together around mission.
Yeah, I always tell our donors and our supporters, one of the best things that you can do is, share why you're connected to organizations. And that's also, connecting those dots to, letting people know what's going on in the community, and how more people can help the nonprofit sector. But yeah, it's all about, I think, getting involved in communicating, what you're passionate about.
For me, it's just this continued drumbeat of invest in organizations. Invest in organizations. Please consider supporting nonprofit organizations with the nimble funding that they need to explore these types of opportunities. It's not always about how many widgets can be created or how many, 27 different metrics, can be a result of your $2,000 contribution. Invest in the missions and trust the leadership, and then pollinate, pollinate as much as you can, but really find something you care about and give. We need a strong sector here.
Fantastic. Well, Angie, Jamie, and Okpara, I want to thank you for being on this session today with us and for the work that you're doing on behalf of your individual organizations, but then each one of you are heavily involved in being the community pollinators. I've already used your term once, Angie. I'm going to keep using it. And making some great connections, not only locally, but statewide. And this work is critical to each of your points. It's now more than ever, we need to be supporting our nonprofit communities. So thank you for that. And thank you for leading this discussion today. And thanks to everybody on this call. I appreciate it. And you've got a good 15 minutes before we head out to our next block, the 3:15 block for Iowa Ideas. Have a great afternoon, everyone.